potentially welcome for the first time to our full-length one review. I want you guys to know, as the name implies, we're going to be reviewing from full-length one. So if you haven't taken full-length one yet, I'm not going to tell you to leave, but it might be a good idea to leave so you don't spoil the surprise of the first full-length. Although I commend you on your assertiveness, I guess, coming to this session. And I welcome you to stay, frankly, if you haven't taken full-length one. Having said that, though, I am going to assume everybody has taken full-length one. Also, this being a CARS session, there's going to be a lot of referring back to the passage. So I will invite you to download the Download Me in the bottom right. While you're doing that, give me a smiley face with its tongue sticking out if you are, if you can hear me, see me, and you're excited to be here for our CARS 1 full-length review session. Amit even has a nose. All right. Is it Aluin? Thumbs up. Valencia, I like to see it. Aliwin? All right. Cool. Oh, Ailwin. Ailwin, that's a pretty one. I haven't heard that one before. Ailwin. Nice. Welcome. Glad to have you. Like ginger ale. For the 178th thousandth time in your life, you just had that conversation, right? So let's go ahead and download the pod, or the poll if you haven't yet, and we are going to yeah, right. My last name is Farah. You would think people could get it right, but they all call me Farah, and that is super frustrating. I can only imagine what Ailwin must be like. It is a really pretty name, though. If you have downloaded that, the last thing I want to point out is there are actually 6 passages incorporated into that download pod. We will look at 2 today. 2 today. That is to say, the first one in our first learning goal has a lot to do with attack questions that reference a particular paragraph or phrase within a passage. Then we've incorporated 2 additional passages from full-length 1 that also do a very good job of sticking to this first learning goal. So whereas you guys have 9 of these passages in your CARS section review, we went ahead and highlighted 3 that actually do a very good job of illustrating this skill that we're learning right now. And then the second passage we're going to look at today is going to be awesome because it has to do with this oh boy, a guy who seems like he'd be really pleasant to talk to at a dinner party. He's very opinionated and very, oh gosh, let's say articulate so I can be positive about it. We've identified a couple of passages that do a very good job of presenting opinion-based questions so that as you go back to your full length, you can review it with a couple of these specific learning targets in mind. With that in mind, let's look at our first passage. I know you guys have already read it, but I want to break it down with you and review it just like you will on your own after this session, or perhaps already have after your first full length. Our strategy here is to employ the various strategies that we have learned in this class with special emphasis on using the reference that question stems give us. That's what makes this learning target unique. Okay, so let's take a look at our passage. I love this passage because paragraph 1 is just so typical. We'll read this together. In the fast new choreography of American compassion, explanation is twirled into excuse, and the spotlights shine endows feeling with a prominence that facts could only hope for. Perception has become more important than reality. In homes, classrooms, and workplaces, we prefer to understand viewpoints rather than discern truths. And now it seems the compassion craze has swept up biography. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Thanksgiving with my family, right? It's just a bunch of old people ranting about how America has gone to crap. I don't have a lot of confidence in this author so far. At least I don't have a lot of confidence in this author's ability to put together any kind of coherent, sensical statement whatsoever, and that's his fault. That's not my fault, frankly. If you read a paragraph like this and you have no idea what's going on, my point is it's the author's fault. Blame that guy for not being able to say what he means and resorting to esoteric, metaphorical, kind of flowery language rather than just stating his point directly. This is a storm in a teacup for the second passage we're going to see today. But what I would do on test day is just keep moving on. Because in paragraph 2 we see, after recounting the prevalent view of Nicholas II, and I'm thinking, what? Wasn't this guy just talking about how the compassion craze is ruining America, and now he wants to go on about Nicholas II? Again, this is the author's fault, not our fault. But let's see what we can do with this author's writing. After recounting the prevalent view of Nicholas II, let me ask you guys a follow-up question. Almost every time when we see language like, here is the prevalent view, or the predominant view, or the majority view of an opinion, what will come later on in that paragraph or passage after the prevalent view? What will come later in this paragraph after the prevalent? And if you're reading ahead right now, okay, Ulencia, maybe examples of the prevalent view. And in fact, we see exactly that. And then after the examples, what almost always is going to come after, like, why would the guy make a special point to say, this is what most people believe? What's he going to talk about next? Before the test questions, but after the examples, we actually, if you were here last hour, we saw this exact same schema. Okay, sweet. We all have an opportunity to learn something right now. The non-prevalent view, right? If you ever see something about the majority opinion, it is almost a guarantee. I will come to your house and give you $5, and that's going to cost me $705 for the plane ticket. I'm that confident that you will see the minority opinion or an alternate point of view coming up next. And the reason why I'm so certain is if they didn't want to contrast the prevalent view with the minority view, they wouldn't go to the trouble of calling it the prevalent view in the first place. They just start talking about the thing they wanted to talk about. What our author is doing here is a very common literary technique. She is telling us what most people believe so that she can contrast that with what the minority opinion is coming up in just a little bit. So let's see what the prevalent view is. After recounting the prevalent view of Nicholas II, which faults the czars for failure to recognize the dire conditions of his day, neglect for astute advisors, and reliance instead on sources incompetent to influence state behavior. Wait a minute here for a second, gang. If you were Frankenstein's monster and you had one word to describe these things, failure to recognize dire conditions, neglecting your astute advisors, and relying instead on incompetent people, would you say these things are good or bad? Yeah, if Frankenstein's monster can figure this out, I think you guys got a pretty good shot too, right? The prevalent view is that Nicholas II was a bad guy. He did a lot of bad stuff. I guess at the very least he's incompetent, right? The prevalent view is that Nicholas is incompetent. Y.S. Bark in Nicholas the Unlucky concedes that Nicholas was a poor leader. Take a look at this. She says, yes, I agree that he was a poor leader, but notice the verb here, concede. When you concede something, you're kind of doing it unwittingly, right? You're like, yeah, okay, sure, he was a poor leader, right? And that's because Y.S. Bark holds the minority opinion. She doesn't just think he was a poor leader, she thinks something that differentiates herself from the prevalent view. How do I know? Because she then adds a quote, which is a bunch of evidence backing up her main contention. Nicholas was a doomed figure who had the misfortune of presiding over, but not the responsibility for contributing to, the calamitous demise of Tsarist Russia. In other words, most people think that Nicholas was incompetent, and his incompetence is what ruined Russia. Y.S. Bark agrees that he was incompetent, but basically thinks there's nothing he could do about the calamitous demise of Tsarist Russia. He was sort of just standing by while it happened, and there was nothing, good leader or bad leader, that he could have done. That is our minority opinion. Okay? Now again, if you're not as familiar, you're not as used to looking for these kinds of structural arguments, let me point out, I know nothing about Nicholas II. I know nothing about Tsarist Russia other than what can be learned in Disney's Anastasia. That's the extent of my historical knowledge about Russia. And yet, I can see very clearly there's a majority view, he's incompetent, and a minority view. Yeah, he's incompetent, but that didn't really matter. That's what the MCAT wants me to recognize. Now, take a look at paragraph number 3. Right? The product of an accomplished historian known for conventional scholarship on interwar diplomatic history, Bark, yada, 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 yada. In other words, our author wants to talk about his feelings about Y.S. Bark. And let me ask you guys, why is it so important to pay attention to authors' feelings? Yeah, those are on those test questions that Aylwin mentioned as being at the end of the passage. Every time, there they are, like clockwork. So what is the word that our author used to describe Bark's work so far? Already in the paragraph, what word has she used to describe Bark? Yeah, she says Bark is accomplished. You don't have to be Frankenstein's monster to tell me, is that a good or a bad word? Thumbs up, Ulencia. Exactly. Now, you guys, this being full-length 1, you are quite accomplished in cars, and you might be very well used to painting people as good guys or bad guys. Author agrees, author disagrees. What we're going to start to see in this passage on this full length already is that things are a little bit more nuanced most of the time on the MCAT, because here our author says Bark is an accomplished historian. And then our author gives a bunch of evidence to back that up. Our author says Bark's first foray into popular political biography is a deft review. That's a good thing, right? And it says that in every respect but governments, Nicholas Russia was rapidly becoming modern. Again, a good thing. Developments in technology and communication and transportation increased the magnitude of Russia's Europeness. This sounds like a good thing as well. In other words, our author just spent the second paragraph bashing Nicholas II, talking about how everybody thought he was incompetent and no good. And yet here we see in every respect but governance, Russia actually had a lot of good things going for it. It was just that government element that was lacking. As well, so far our author has nothing but good things to say about Y.S. Bark. Oops, jumping too far ahead. We get to paragraph number 4, and fun things start to happen in paragraph 4. After 1860, Russian economic life began, however, embryonically to resemble Western forms. Only governance remained unchanged, and then we see the word yet. Gang, why is it so important to recognize words like yet, or but, or however, or on the other hand? change in their opinion, or flow. I like it, Ulencia. Let's apply that to this idea here. Everything we saw in the previous paragraph, we said this is all good stuff. We said it's all positive. All positive. So what would you guys expect is coming in our next paragraph down here? While I fight with my tools. There we go. That's what I was looking for. Probably what we're going to see down here after that contrast keyword is negatives. Negatives, right? Yet it was governance that most needed transformation. And then we see Bark nevertheless offers a confused attempt to vindicate Nicholas. What word is our author using to describe the historian Bark now? Previously, she said she was accomplished. What word is being used down here? Here's Bark. What word is being used to describe Bark in paragraph 4? Confused. Yeah. So again, it's a little bit more nuanced. Our author generally respects Y.S. Bark. Our author generally has good things to say about Russia at this time period. However, in paragraph 4, we see this one thing Bark did. She tried to vindicate Nicholas. That was confused. I don't agree with that. As well, for all the good things that were going on in Russia, the one thing that needed to change didn't change. Governance most needed transformation and did not transform. So what do we see next? A quote. Well, again, gang, if passages are always going to be divided out into conclusions based on evidence, here we have a conclusion. Bark is confused. And then down here, this must all be evidence that backs that up. We'll read over this quote because we don't want to skip anything on test day, but we already understand its role in the passage overall. At the time, calls came for a compromise of Tsarism, yet it was in their tradition that the Tsars saw the sine qua non of Russian life. This was the impossible situation confronting Nicholas. Given these circumstances, it is implausible to suppose that Nicholas should have viewed the abandonment or even compromise of autocracy as Russia's salvific hope. To the contrary, turbulent times are perfect for redoubling the faith of ages. The first reaction to discomforting ideas is hatred. The rest is detail. Witness history's smile on stalwarts. Woodrow Wilson. No idea what this author's talking about because I don't really care because no questions have told me it's important yet. And it's really just evidence that backs up the conclusion. Our author thinks Bark is confused. So we get into paragraph number 5, the last paragraph. And this is quite a lengthy paragraph, but what we're going to see is some of the tools that we've used are definitely going to help us out on this paragraph because we're going to look for a conclusion and we're going to know that everything else here is all evidence supporting that conclusion. Nicholas the Unlucky is ultimately unsatisfying because Nicholas is a poor choice for arguing historical inevitability and historical compassion. Boom! There is our conclusion. What does the author think at the end of this passage? What is her conclusion overall? In your own words. Yeah, our author says that book that Y.S. Bark wrote, ultimately, it's not a very good book. Ultimately, Y.S. Bark was wrong because Nicholas was a poor choice in the first place. And therefore, the rest of this is going to be evidence. It's all going to be evidence. Right? Like monarchism at the same time, Tsarist absolutism may have been doomed. Perhaps no Tsar after 1895 could have saved it. But citing the size and force of a tidal wave does nothing to exonerate a leader who all but tore down the dike and let it in. Great metaphor, bro. Not really that worth my time. Worthwhile sources claim not that Nicholas originated the causes of the Russian Revolution, but that at best he did nothing to alleviate them, and at worst he intensified them. Monarchists' astute, if reluctant, embrace of modernity in Prussia and Japan, blah, 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 right? Here we have evidence supporting the conclusion. Here we have examples supporting the conclusion. And at the end, I don't know, for all of us, from school children to leaders and even historians, perception may seem to be more important than reality. Sooner or later, reality avenges itself. Welcome back to Thanksgiving at my parents' house. Just old cranky people complaining about the downfall of America, I guess. Okay. Let's take a look at some of the questions that were based on this passage. And again, what characterizes these questions is that these questions all cited text from the passage, and therefore we're going to have to go back to the passage to answer these questions. Now, I want to point out, some of these came from stuff I told you not to pay much attention to in the first place. The reason why was we don't know what's important until a question tells us it's important. And once a question tells us that a detail is important, then we go back and scrutinize that detail. So here we have, as used in the context of the passage, the words, the rest is detail, refer to what? Well, if we went back to the passage, we find this in paragraph number 3. And let me ask you guys first and foremost, what was the point of paragraph 3? Remember, paragraph 2 was all about positive stuff. What then did paragraph 3 introduce? Yeah, that negative stuff. Exactly, Ulencia. So we find this particular detail down here towards the end. The rest is detail. And notice that that quote is associated with, randomly, Woodrow Wilson. Randomly with Woodrow Wilson. So my question for you guys is the following. Why does any author ever bring up any example ever? Since Woodrow Wilson here is apparently an example, why does any author ever bring up any example ever? Yeah, to prove their point, to help prove their point. Now remember, all this stuff down here, this is all evidence for Bark's point, which Bark wanted to, quote, vindicate Nicholas. To vindicate Nicholas. So what this quote has to do with is Woodrow Wilson, an example used to help vindicate Nicholas, right? So what we're seeing with this is that in some way, Woodrow Wilson and the associated quote must be used to help vindicate or bail out Nicholas II. Because remember, Bark thinks Nicholas was a good guy, even though our author disagreed. Now let's take a look at these answer choices. And again, notice our execute step here. Woodrow Wilson in some way helps vindicate Nicholas II. We want to find an answer choice that has to do with this link between Woodrow Wilson and Nicholas II. So let's take a look at these. Bark's belief that popular commitment to core values, even though the values are subjective, is essential to persevering through periods of national turmoil. Notice that that is a pretty esoteric answer choice, and yet it doesn't mention in any way the link between Woodrow Wilson and Nicholas II. As Ulencia pointed out, Woodrow Wilson is in some way trying to prove Bark's point about Nicholas II. B. Bark's suggestion that Woodrow Wilson's policies, though more successful than those of Nicholas's, similarly reflected a strong commitment to traditional beliefs. Again, kind of an esoteric answer choice, but at least it does have a link between Woodrow Wilson and Nicholas, so it's a match. C. The author's contention that weighing the merits of alternative reform policies is less important than a ruler's overall commitment to reform. No, that's not going to work for us. D. The author's assumption that Woodrow Wilson's activist policies do not constitute a reasonable comparison for Nicholas. Well, again, this has Woodrow Wilson and Nicholas in it, but it says they're not linked together, which does not match. Therefore, the answer to this question is letter B. Take a look at question now number 37. The author's discussion in the passage of the Hohenzollerns assumes which of the following? Well, again, we have to go back to the passage to find this information. We find the Hohenzollerns in paragraph number 5. Again, amongst the evidence for this conclusion. The Hohenzollerns were mentioned right. Where were they? Right here. Okay. Now again, evidence supports the conclusion. So what we need to do is figure out what the conclusion was that this was supporting. And what the conclusion was right here. Worthwhile sources claim not that Nicholas originated the causes of the Russian Revolution, but that at best he did nothing to alleviate them. That's kind of an esoteric point. So let's make an analogy. This kind of reminds me of, like, have any of you guys ever been in a relationship that just kind of fizzles out, just kind of falls apart? There's no like big fight. There's no, nothing you can point to and blame. It just sort of breaks down, right? And you're left thinking like, well, you didn't do anything to cause the breakup, but you didn't really do anything to stop it either. That's what this stuff in green is saying. That Nicholas didn't cause the Russian Revolution, but he didn't really do anything to stop it either. He did nothing to alleviate these causes of the Russian Revolution. And in fact, maybe even if he didn't cause the breakup, whatever caused the breakup, he intensified those factors as well, right? And so what role are the Hohenzollerns of Austria-Hungary playing? Well, you look at these guys and you're thinking, this is kind of like you're looking at your friends and you're saying, you know what, they really fought to be together. The Hohenzollerns did not outlast World War I. They had faced assault of modernity beginning much earlier and probably would have fallen much earlier. That is, unlike Nicholas, who just sort of stood by and let it happen, these guys lasted a lot longer time because they fought back against it. They did not behave as Nicholas did. So again, what we have here is evidence supporting that conclusion that Nicholas just kind of stood by and let this happen. So what relevance is this? Well, again, they must be similar to the Nicholas II, but they had different policies that led to greater success. So we take a look at our answer choices, and in fact, let me pull up a poll pod and you guys can vote along with this. There's our poll. You can go ahead and vote in with which answer choice seems to match. Oops, sorry guys, I accidentally reset the poll. Yeah, exactly. The political challenges faced by the rulers of Austria-Hungary around 1848 resembled those faced by Nicholas in 1917. Very similar to the last question. We needed a link between the evidence and the conclusion. There it is. Okay. Taking a look at question number 38, again, what these questions have in common is that our author, they give us a specific citation, and we have to go back to the passage and integrate that citation with new information. The author claims in paragraph 5 that Nicholas at least failed to alleviate and at most exacerbated the causes of the collapse in 1917. The support offered for this conclusion is relatively what? Well, again, we go back to the passage, and this time they even tell us where this passage reference is going to be. And again, we're looking for support to the conclusion. What we're going to have here is a scenario where the last question helps us answer the next question. Because again, here we have the conclusion right here. And then all the rest of this is evidence supporting that conclusion. What we have here is Prussia and Japan were successfully able to stave off revolution. The Hohenzollerns in Austria-Hungary successfully staved off modernization. And then a little bit of more qualitative evidence there towards the end. The point is, this guy provides a conclusion and then provides a lot of support that helps justify that conclusion, which ultimately is what justifies answer choice D. The support is relatively strong. The author provides several comparative illustrations of cases in which collapse was averted or forestalled. So there we have it, gang. There are a couple of other questions associated with this, and again, we're going to assign these in homework. But let me point out, right here, what we have is more passage information. We are following the suggestion of his wife. That was something that was mentioned in the passage. He replaced advisors and ignored the problems. Again, something mentioned directly in the passage. Taking a look at the last question here, again, we have another direct citation from the passage. Our first learning goal was all about learning to incorporate questions that directly cite the passage. And in fact, as I mentioned, gang, in the handout, you also have another passage from this most recent full length that has a lot of citations in it, and in fact, even a third passage that had a lot of citations in the question stems, so you can go back and review this specific learning goal. Let's move now, because we're at the halfway point of our lesson, into our second learning goal, identifying and answering opinion-based questions. That is, here we're going to see passages that are extremely opinionated, and therefore the questions are going to be associated with these that are extremely opinionated as well. What I would want to do with this is I want to help walk you guys through an extremely challenging passage because it is so opinionated. And let's talk about what we can do when we are faced with that situation on test day. In particular, some of the strategies that we might apply. We're going to note the opinions while reading the passage, and we're going to recognize when question stems are related to those opinions as well, using our outline to help us along the way. Let's take a look at our passage and see what we can come up with. Those who prefer opinions are not blameless when the circumstances in which they opine. I'm sorry again. I'm reading this all wrong. Let me try it again. Those who prefer opinions are not blameless when circumstances in which they opine would immediately cause their expression to instigate some mischievous act. This guy's definitely one of these finger-pointing, like, nutty professors, right? One of those people who just can't seem to say what's on their mind, or maybe are more concerned with trying to blow us away with fancy terminology that actually communicate with us at the end of the day. When I was studying for the MCAT, I would run into a passage like this, and I would think, oh my God, I'm so dumb. I can't figure this out. Why can't I understand what this guy is saying? What's the problem with me? Should I practice more? Should I read more? What's going on with me that prevents me from understanding this? And I got some really good advice on that point along the way. Maybe the problem isn't me. And maybe the problem isn't you. Maybe the problem is this author. Maybe this author should spend a little bit less time with his nose in a book and a little bit more time learning how to communicate with people more effectively. Because what we're going to see is that the ideas that this guy has to say, they're not so hard to wrap your mind around, his ideas. What's hard to wrap your mind around is the way he ineffectively communicates those ideas. And I agree, Ulencia. That gave me a lot of confidence in approaching a passage like this to say, you know what, I can figure this out. It's not so challenging. The ideas, that is, it's just the way this guy talks. For example, he has a double negative. Not blameless, aka, what does that mean? If you are not blameless, they have blame. Why didn't he just say that, right? Why didn't he just say those who prefer opinions. What does it mean to not prefer but profer an opinion? I think about like the prefix in professor, professorial, profess, prefer. All of these are related to what? Yeah, two wrongs do make a right here, Elwin. Exactly. Prefer means like to speak your opinion. Again, why didn't he just say those who speak their opinions should be blamed when the circumstances in which they opine would immediately cause their expression to instigate some mischievous act? Let's turn on our Frankenstein hat for a second here. Instigate some mischievous act, is that a good or a bad thing? Bad, right? Let me see if I can do better. People should be blamed for their opinions when they cause negative consequences. I think I like mine a lot better. I guess I'm smarter than this guy after all. Then we get an example of this. An opinion that corn dealers are starvers of the poor. Who thinks that? Or that owning private property is robbery. Who thinks that? Who thinks that corn dealers are stealing from the poor? And that owning private property is robbery. Okay, whatever. An opinion that corn dealers are starvers of the poor, that owning private property is robbery, ought to be unmolested when simply circulated through the press. Okay, so I can have opinions and they ought to be unmolested. That is to say, not that they're fine when I simply circulate them through the press. Oh, but we have a contrast keyword. But may justly incur punishment when delivered orally to a mob assembled before the house of a corn dealer, or when distributed, handed out about the same mob in the form of a pamphlet. Because why, gang? Because if I have a mob of people outside of a corn dealer and I am out there yelling at them that corn dealers are starvers of the poor, what is that mob likely to do? Attack. Exactly, right? So this guy's saying it's okay to have an opinion, but if your opinion instigates negative consequences, you should be blamed for the negative consequences here, right? The but tells me new information is coming. You may be punished if you incite a mob to attack a corn dealer. That actually happened last week. I heard about it on Fox News while I was at the treadmill, right after they talked about space aliens invading, and right before they described the news that the AAMC was abolishing the MCAT. Right? But again, gang, is this such a hard idea for us to understand? You can have opinions, that's okay. Just don't use your opinions to get people hurt. Why didn't he just say that in the first place? It's probably because he's got a giant insecurity that causes him to try to act like the smartest guy in the room. I don't know, man. It's his problem. It's not my problem. I guess it's my problem because I got to deal with this guy to get points on my MCAT. But really? Okay, whatever, dude. Nope, there we go. Let's go on to paragraph 2. The liberty of the individual must be thus far limited. We should limit people's liberty. He must not make himself a nuisance to other people. Again, we said in paragraph 1, it's okay to have opinions as long as they don't hurt other people. In this case, in a literal sense, get someone attacked. So, okay, a person should have liberty, right, as long as they don't use that liberty to become a nuisance to other people. And then again, we have a contrast keyword here, but if he refrains from molesting others in matters that concern them and merely acts according to his own inclination and judgment in matters which concern himself, he should be allowed to carry his opinions into practice at his own cost. This is bar etiquette. I mean, literally, when you are done with this passage, you're going to need to go to a bar, and how should you behave in that bar? Well, it's okay to have a good time, to get carried away with your friends, to act according to your own inclination and judgment in matters that concern you. Just don't go molesting other people or hurting other people. That's simple. Again, why doesn't the guy just say it like that? I don't know, man. It's his problem, not my problem. Again, it's okay to have opinions as long as you're not hurting other people with your opinions. Then we get into this very esoteric conversation. Just as it is useful for the mitigation of humankind's imperfections that different opinions exist, so it is that there should be different experiments of living, that free scope should be given to various expressions of character, and that the worth of different modes of life should be proved practically by those who see fit to try them. Ho, 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 ho. One of my favorite games with people like this is to just cut out words and see if the sentence still makes sense. That is kind of actively paraphrase as I go. This guy says, it is useful that different opinions exist. Why didn't he just say that? I don't know, man. So also, there should be different ways of living. And we should try out and see which modes of living are worthwhile. That will be proven practically by anyone who wants to try. You guys maybe were on with John Linick about 2 hours ago. John Linick, fun fact, lives in a teepee. This is true. John Linick lives in a teepee in the woods of Colorado and teaches you guys via satellite internet. He should be allowed to do that as long as he's not hurting anybody else. It's useful to have different opinions. It's useful to have different ways of living your life as long as they're practical. Where not the person's own character but the traditions and customs of other people are the rule of conduct, there is lacking one of the principal ingredients of individual and social progress. Again, gang, double negative. Where not the person's own character, but the traditions and customs of other people are the rule, there is lacking one of the principal ingredients of individual and social progress. In other words, what this guy is saying, if we cut out all the gobbledygook, he's saying, where people's own character is the rule of the land, there is individual and social progress. So again, what this guy says in this paragraph is you can act how you like, just don't hurt others. He's saying probably there's some value in people living different ways. And he's saying that people's character drives progress. Traditions and customs get in the way of progress. People's own character helps drive progress. Again, gang, what I really want you to take away from this is that when you come across these kinds of passages, maybe not on test day, but maybe right now, it's worth your time to go back and prove to yourself that actually you can make sense of this passage, that it's not your fault you can't understand it, it's the author's fault that you can't understand it. And what I can tell you guys from my own experience is that the more practice you get picking apart passages like we're doing right now, the easier and easier it's going to become, and the more confident you're going to get that you can, in fact, attack a passage like this successfully. Actually, I think there was an extra paragraph here. Yeah, there we go. So what I'd like you guys to do is now take a minute and attack this fourth paragraph on your own, and see what you can come up with as far as figuring out what this guy has to say, given that, again, he's the one that has a hard time communicating. You're not the one who has a hard time understanding. Take a minute with this fourth paragraph and read and outline it as you would or perhaps did on test day. See you guys back here. All right, everybody, welcome back from our minute. And keep in mind on test day, if you have about 10 minutes to a passage and question set, you really do have around a minute to each paragraph on your average MCAT passage, which is a little more time than you're not in such a mad rush as you might think initially. Taking a look at this paragraph, what did you guys take away from this third paragraph? Nice. I like it. It's up to the individual to experience, interpret life his own way. It's up to the person to act accordingly of his character. Kind of feeds into the points in paragraph number 2 about how people's character is valuable and drives individual and social progress, right? Now, as for the piece about tradition and history and culture and those kinds of things, our guy seems to have a mixed opinion about it. He says, of course, people are going to learn from history. Nobody denies that people should be trained in youth to know and benefit by the ascertained result of human experience, but we don't need to be slaves to tradition, essentially. We can make our own distinguishments and have our own opinions. Same thing with this last paragraph. This one is also esoteric and dense, but what I want you guys to notice is the structure is really going to help you out. See if you can pick out what I mean as we go. Take a minute and read and outline this paragraph as well. All right, everybody. Another minute here. In what way did the structure of this paragraph help you out? Did you guys spot what I was talking about? Yeah, it's a list, right? We've got a first, second, third structure here. First, second, and third. And what that means is we can break this down a little bit here. This guy says the traditions and customs of people, again, they're valuable, they're worthy of consideration, but, and then we know 3 buts are coming after this. But they may not have interpreted their experience correctly, but it might be unsuited to people outside of that culture. Or third, the customs might be both good and suitable. However, there's no value in customs as customs. And again, our guy returns to his main point. You need to think critically, think for yourself about what benefits you. So if custom is beneficial to most people, it may not be beneficial to every person in every circumstance. So there we have, again, our author being very esoteric, very strange, but these are reasons why traditional customs shouldn't limit freedom today. Our guy's got no problem with customs. His problem seems to be with people blindly sticking to customs, and that is probably something that all of us, like, again, welcome back to my family's Thanksgiving dinner. We got time for a couple of questions based on this passage, and what we're going to see is that, again, opinion-based passages are going to have opinion-based questions, right? Of the following actions, our author would least likely approve of what, right? Well, we've seen from our author, he really doesn't like two things. He really doesn't like people blindly following custom, and he really doesn't like people harming others or in some way hurting others. So our author would be least likely to approve of harming others or blindly following customs. We at least got those big points out of our author for all of his esoteric mumbo jumbo. So let's take a look at an answer choice. What do you guys got here? You can vote in on this on your own. Harming others or blindly following customs. One of the two. I guess when I say harming others, I should be a little more specific. I can see a few matches here. Maybe not harming others, but impinging on others' rights. Well, okay, let's go through these. At the very least, letter A, scolding a young boy for continually bullying a classmate. Would our author be a fan of bullying? No. So he would be a fan of scolding a bully, right? He would be a fan of scolding that bully. Defending an accused murderer on the grounds that he acted in self-defense. Well, again, here our author kind of thinks that we shouldn't harm others or we shouldn't impinge upon other people's rights. But let me ask you this. Would our author be a fan of self-defense, of sort of sticking up for yourself and, you know, again, bar rules? Yeah, our author's got no problem with self-defense. So while he doesn't like murder, he does like self-defense, and that's going to rule that out as well. How about letters C and D? Confiscating a recreational drug user's supply to keep him or her from using, or letter D, publishing an editorial that decries domestic violence. Would our author be a fan of domestic violence? No. So he would certainly be a fan of decrying public violence. And that leaves us with letter C, confiscating a recreational user's drug supply to keep him or her from using. Our author thinks people should be able to do whatever they want as long as they don't harm others, and ultimately that's what makes letter C the correct answer to this question. So what we have to recognize for a question like this, and in fact looking at the rest of the questions in this set, question 4, we see here, in order to apply the author's general view about individual liberty, again, very much about opinions. Question 5, the author of the passage believes, again, very much a question about general opinions. Question 6, the author holds that one should not necessarily defer, and so on and so forth. Again, a question about the author's opinions. In fact, I invite you guys to take a brief look with me as well at passage 5. What we have in passage 5 is, this was, again, another passage that we identified for you guys. Never accept anything as true that you do not clearly know to be so. That is, carefully, I'm sorry, I'm reading this wrong again. Never accept anything as true that you do not clearly know to be so. That is, carefully avoid jumping to conclusions and include nothing in judgments other than blah, 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 blah. We have another extremely opinionated author who seems to have a very hard time communicating like people do. So my point for you guys as we wrap up tonight, We've identified lots of opportunities for you guys to practice the skills from our first learning goal. We have lots of passages with citation-based questions. From our second learning goal, we have at least 2 very challenging passages with very opinionated authors. I recommend you guys pick this guy apart for practice like we just did, and then answer the questions accordingly. They all should relate back to these opinion-based authors and questions. I want to say thank you guys so much. I want to invite you also to stick around for our last hour with Nzinga Mack, one of my favorite teachers. She's going to be doing, I think, optics or something completely unrelated to cars. So you guys should have a really good time with her. Yeah, light and optics. Total break from the cars that we've been doing. I invite you to stick around and see her presentation. It's going to be really helpful. With that, I'll see you guys in a future channel session. Thanks for the hard work tonight, and I see you around.